Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll join you again at the end for the Q&A, but for the moment I'm going to disappear. So over to you, Huma. Thank you for joining us. Fantastic to have you here.
Thank you very much, Sally. A very warm welcome to all the webinar participants today. Let's see who we have here with us today. Oh, there are a lot of people here. Sarah from Kuwait. Hello, Sarah. There's Visal Ayat from Libya. Hello, Visal. There's Dr. Mansoor Ali, Nada, Devi, Vika, Ida, Allison, Jamila, Priyanka from India. Hello, Priyanka. Olina from Ukraine, Parisa, Fariz, and many more. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Thank you very much, Sally, for introducing me. Now, before we begin, I'd like to tell you that I'm not an expert in any area. I'm just another teacher next door for you today. I'm here to share ideas that have worked for my learners and me, and I hope you find them useful. So let's get started. Give me a moment to share my screen, please. All right, I hope everybody can see my screen. Please say yes in the chat box if you can. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Nawal. All right, so we are here today to answer this question, should homework be humdrum? It's rhetorical and the answer is pretty obvious, but perhaps the planning and execution not so much, and that's why we are here today. So let's begin by thinking about homework. So is homework important? Now, the majority of the respondents have answered affirmatively. So you answered this very question, the very same question in the webinar survey, and the majority of you have answered it affirmatively. Now, the next question then to answer would be, why is homework important? Could you please comment in the chat box? Why do you think it's important? Some nice answers there. Recap, practice. Oops, that disappeared pretty quickly. To reinforce learning, I like that, Amir. Students can practice and revise the concepts at home. That's right. To check understanding, to check progress. Wonderful, all useful and relevant points there. I couldn't agree more with all of you. I think homework is an important part of language learning because it's an extension of our lessons. In other words, an extension of our classroom, except that this classroom is in our learners' real world. And like many of you have pointed out, I think this is an opportunity for teachers and learners to check understanding of concepts and target language. Now let's think about our learners. How do your learners feel about doing homework? Are they motivated? Which of these emoji do you think represents their feelings about homework? You could number them in the chat box, please. Okay, lots of twos there, a few ones, lots of twos and ones. Okay, there is a 4, a smile there. Lots and twos and ones and threes. Okay, so the house seems to be divided, and that's why we are here today. Now, why do you think your learners feel the way you think they do? Okay, Muhammad says perhaps they are lazy. They're afraid to make mistakes, could be. There's a lot of pressure, expectations, overburden. It could be boring for them, perhaps not motivated. Sorry. Odora says they might see it as punishment, unfortunately. It could be boring. There's a lot of homework. Perhaps you're not interested. Yes, that's true. There could be many, many drivers or factors that influence our learners' motivation to do or not do their homework. But I think our job as teachers is to focus on factors that are in our control and try and set more meaningful and useful homework for our learners. So before we see what's in store for us in today's webinar, I'd like to know what you expect out of this webinar. So what do you expect to get out of this webinar? Now, 3 themes have emerged from your responses to this very same question in the pre-webinar survey. And those themes are, many of you want to learn some new ideas. And then there are those who want to pick up some engaging homework activities. I like the third one in particular, where many of you have suggested that perhaps we should look at jazzing up the course book exercises. I think number 3 is very important because as teachers, we work with a lot of time constraints. So it may not always be possible to plan and set up innovative homework activities for our learners. Also, the course book writers have spent a lot of time and effort on writing course book or workbook exercises. So why not look at recycling them instead of abandoning them altogether in favor of something new or innovative? So if you've got any other expectations in addition to this, could you please put them in the chat box? Some practical ideas. I hope to share some practical ideas with you. New ideas, okay, all of them. Shireen says all the 3. That's nice, Shireen. Tips for motivating learners do their homework. New ideas, practical ideas. Make homework funny, okay? Engaging activities. All right, so we all seem to be pretty much on the same page. So let's see what we're going to do today. Sorry. In today's webinar, we're going to review the criteria for making homework more engaging. Secondly, we look at some typical homework activities and evaluate them against the criteria to make them more meaningful. And finally, we'll explore some fun homework activities. So let's get started. Now, a few years ago, I would get very frustrated setting homework for my learners because they wouldn't do it. And that would frustrate me a lot because I think the problem is if learners rely too much on coming to the lessons and on the teacher, it could slow down their progress because a lot of the language learning happens outside the classroom in our real world. So what I did was I set out to do a mini classroom research to find out my learners' feelings about homework. So there were 30 students who were part of my research study, adults and teenage learners at the intermediate level in a face-to-face and an online learning environment. And I studied their reactions through a SurveyMonkey questionnaire and some focus group discussions. So the first question I asked my learners was the obvious one. Do you like your homework activities? No surprises here. As you can see, about 60% of my learners were not very happy about the kind of homework I was setting up for them. And these were the themes that emerged from the focus group discussions. Like you rightly pointed out earlier, they weren't interested, they found it boring. Some of them did not like homework. So the next question on my mind was, how can I make homework a positive experience for my learners, which leads us to our first aim, reviewing some criteria for making homework engaging. So I did a lot of reading, and it's funny that there's a lot of research that's been done on what should happen in the classroom, but not so much on what should happen outside the classroom, where a lot of the learning really takes place in our daily lives. So, but fortunately, I stumbled upon something that Howard Gardner said in one of his interviews with Glory Chaika. He said, teachers should devote energy to creating homework that is buzz rather than banal. Could you help me fill in these blanks? We need a word with an S and a P. What do you think they could be? So homework should be dash and dash. Special, that's nice, satisfying. Simple and practical, I like that, Pooja. Special and practical, suitable and practical, nice answers there. Stimulating, Andrew, bingo there. Okay, we got one there, that was stimulating. Simplifying, productive. Simple and practical, smart and productive. Smart, that's nice. Practical, there are lots of practicals there. Okay, I'm sure you're keen to know what Howard Gardner told Glory Chaika in the interview, and this is what he said. He said that homework should be stimulating and provocative. Now, stimulating and provocative, I was stuck on these words and I wanted to find out what kind of activities could be stimulating and provocative. So I did a lot of reading. So based on reading and reflection, I came up with an engagement checklist that I use to set up any kind of learning or homework activities for my learners. And this is what it looks like. So I ask questions. I ask myself these questions. Is it meaningful? Which means, is it useful and relevant? Is it personalized? Now, this is very important because you won't believe the number of times I hear my son say, oh, what's the point? I'm never going to be using this. So I think it's very important that the homework or learning activities are meaningful and personalized. They should be authentic, meaning something that we do in our real lives. Interactive, they must focus on integrated skills. I think the ones in purple are very, very important. Now, as we all know, creativity is supposed to be the fifth language skill today. So it is nice if homework activities can be creative, can help learners exploit their cognitive skills. And finally, as teachers, we need to strive to make our learners autonomous, which means help them voice their choice so we can be a guide on the side and not a sage on the stage. So this is the checklist that I use for setting up any kind of learning or homework activities for my learners, a reminder to myself so I can make activities engaging. So now that we know the criteria for making homework engaging, the criteria that's worked for me, let's evaluate some typical homework activities using this criteria. So the first one here is one of the teachers' favorite activities and one that appears quite often in our course books, a gap fill exercise. What do you think about it? Is it stimulating and provocative? Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Fiona. Not so much, really. Now, my next question is, how can you make this engaging? What can we do with this activity to make this more engaging? Archana says, make it open-ended. How would you do that, Archana? Olena says, no, it's not engaging. Okay, maybe turn it into an online quiz. Well, that's a good idea. I mean, if you have that kind of time where you can convert all the course book exercises or workbook exercises into online quizzes on quizzes or word wall, fantastic. But we're also talking about being practical. How often can teachers do that? Thinking about teaching 4 to 5 lessons every day during this whole term or the next term or this whole academic year? Perhaps not possible. So what can we do? Well, one of the ways I would do that is ask my learners to answer this question along with completing the exercise. So I would tell my learners, you're going to do exercise A, that is fill in the gaps at home. And can you answer this question after you fill in the gaps? Which of these do you agree with? Why? So when they come back, for the next lesson, my learners get these opportunities to discuss their ideas with their partners. So you get them to express their opinions. So they talk about whether they agree whether football is dangerous, is more dangerous than golf, or whether spaghetti is the most wonderful meal there is. So perhaps get your learners to agree or disagree wherever possible when you set up these control practice activities for your learners. Now, there's another way we can make this activity engaging, and that is, whenever possible, get your learners to substitute nouns or names. They could change it to their own names or names of family members or friends or family or something that they like. For example, as you can see here, I love cats. So I have changed number 5 to cats are the most lovable animals. So why don't you ask your learners to complete the gap fill activity and replace the nouns with something that is relevant to them or to their lives? And when they come back again in the following lesson, they can compare their new sentences and check their answers at the same time and have a more meaningful conversation. So these are some of the ways we can deal with some gap fill control practice activities. Now, It is also important, as we know, that one shoe does not fit everybody, to differentiate practice activities. So one of the ways I would do this here is perhaps my not so strong learners get to do the gap fill activities. And perhaps I give these as sentence stems to my stronger learners, so they come up with their own comparative or superlative sentences. Let's move on to the second typical homework activity, which perhaps does not offer us a lot of scope for personalization, something like this, where your learners have to decide which of the sentences is correct. So how can we make this meaningful? Any ideas there? It is quite difficult because there's not much scope for personalization here. Perhaps add some images. Yes, why not, purely? But we are talking about these course book or workbook exercises purely. So learners, go back and look at them. Yes, this is correcting the incorrect ones. Now, what we could do here is actually gamify it. So I would use the old classic grammar auctions. I would tell my learners, well, you're going to decide which of these sentences is correct for homework. But imagine you have 1,000 dirhams to spend. Well, I teach in the UAE, so I've used dirhams here. So imagine you've got 1,000 dirhams to spend. Try to buy the best sentences. Otherwise, you lose money. So the learners decide which of these are correct, and they decide how much money they would spend on these sentences. And when they come back for the following lesson, I turn this into something very interactive by making it a group activity, which means now my learners are told that you're going to work as a group to decide which of these sentences are correct, and you've got 1,000 dirhams to spend. And they also get to use some useful language during their discussion. So they ask each other, oh, what do you think? I agree, I disagree, I'm not so sure. Oh, this one's definitely wrong. So this way we are able to help learners engage, negotiate, and make choices together in the classroom. So that's one of the ways of dealing with very, very controlled activities with not a lot of scope of personalization or making them meaningful. Let's look at another typical homework activity, something that teachers and learners find difficult setting up and doing, and that's the typical writing activity there. So here's an activity from one of my teenage learners' course books, Wild Animals Should Be Protected. So they have to write an essay on this topic. I'm not sure if it's very stimulating or provocative. What can we do here? How can we make this motivating for our learners? Anjali says we can provide outline and a picture, turn it into a debate. That's nice, Anjali. So before they write, they discuss the topic. That's a good idea. Their own experience. They talk about their favorite wild animal. Interesting, very interesting ideas there. Okay, I think in my opinion, it's motivating for learners to write for an audience and to have their work read by them afterwards. So how can we facilitate that? So how can we make it creative? I'm sure one of the go-to apps today for most of us is Padlet, where you can set up those collaborative writing activities and get learners to comment on each other's work. Now, you can make this more authentic by using a few other websites. Now, one of my other favorite platforms is writeabout.com. I'm going to put this link in the chat box. I'd like you to go to this website. You have 30 seconds, and I want you to explore this website and tell me what is the website about and how can you use it for setting writing homework for your learners. So can you please go to this website and spend about 30 minutes exploring this website for yourself? The link is in the chat box. Okay, Parthasarathi likes the website, so perhaps some of you have had a look at it. Now, let me show you this website now. This is the same activity that I showed you a while ago. Wild animals should be protected. Now, this is a very good website. It's a community of writers. So you could create a class here. You could set up a class here and invite your students to join the class. And you could set up activities, for example, like this one, where my learners have got the topic. There's a checklist for reviewing their work. And then I also encourage them to respond to each other's work. Now, quite often we get learners to focus on accuracy when that is not very authentic. I would rather get my learners to focus on their reaction. So they look at each other's work and decide, oh, what was your reaction when you read your peers' work, and why did you feel this way? Something that we all do in our real lives. Now, the benefit of using a platform like this is that you can set this activity up for public or private viewing, which means if you set it for private viewing, only you and your learners can see the responses, your learners' work. But if you set it for public viewing, then all the community writers can respond to your learners' work and react to what they say. So it makes it more engaging. And also there are lots of ideas here for you that have already been created for teachers, other teachers. For example, let me show you a few of them. Okay, don't worry. I know I Googled for cats. Well, that's going to just show some things. All right, as you can see here, so these are other activities set up by other teachers. For instance, imagine you're a cat for a day, write a story explaining what do you do. I like this one. Each egg contains a magical power. Write the story, or what will you find at the end of this rainbow? So you already got some ideas there that you can use with your learners, and they could respond to other teachers' ideas and comment on each other's work. So that's one of the websites that I find very useful. There's Scratch, obviously. I mean, who doesn't know Scratch today? A very popular coding website among all young learners where they can create digital stories and animation. I remember there was this lesson about feelings, and this is what one of my primary learners created. Well, he wanted to show different emotions, as you can see. All right, okay. All right, so that was pretty funny and hilarious, and he told us what those emotions were when we played that video in the class. So that was quite funny. So of course, there's Scratch there for you, and also there's another website called Story Jumper that you could go to later on and explore what it looks like. But I'm going to quickly show you this website too. Now here again, you can set up a class, and if you've got a Google Classroom, you can straight away import it to this platform, and you can get learners to create their own book. Well, and there are other buyers on the website that can even buy their book. For example, they could create a new book, choose the themes. If we go to the monster here, for instance, well, there's a tutorial too. Now, can you see? So this is a book about a monster. So you've got some scenes here, some blank pages for learners to add their text. They could also collaborate, work together, and they could add the dialogue or the text. They could add props. As you can see, they could add or delete scenes, add photos. They could also record their voice reading any of these pages. So this is another useful website. I stumbled upon this very recently. I haven't tried it out, but it looks very interesting. So perhaps would be useful for your learners. And of course, we've got the futureme.org. I'm not sure if you've tried futureme.org. Now, this is a place where you write a letter to your future self. Well, I have tried this myself. So imagine that you've got your learners to learn some future forms. Then you could get them to write a letter to themselves, thinking about what their life would be like in 20 years. So they send the letter to themselves, and they could also send a copy of the letter to you. So, and they could choose when they get the letter, in 6 months, in 1 year, or 2 years. So this is quite interesting and motivating. It's fun to receive that letter after 20 years, perhaps. I mean, something that your learners would have forgotten, and it's nice to then get that letter as a surprise. So I've tried that myself, and it's very useful. And of course, I also get my learners to write Google reviews of places, restaurants they visited, and some film reviews on IMDb. So these are some ways you can make writing more useful for your learners. Now, again, when you set up writing activities, we need to think of differentiating the activity so it is achievable for everybody. Imagine some of your learners write a paragraph about themselves, the stronger learners, then perhaps you can give sentence stems to the not so stronger ones to complete. So it is achievable for everybody and everybody has something to celebrate. So differentiation is the key for setting homework activities, especially if they're writing activities. All right, so we've seen some typical homework activities here. There's another one is the project activities that we all love setting up for our learners. So this is another project activity that I had to set up for my learners, for my teenage learners. It was about plastic bags. Now here, I wanted to make my learners more autonomous, so I gave them a choice to voice their ideas. So they went on a mission called Mission Homework, where they had to choose the kind of project activity they would do for homework. And this is what they came up with. The first one's pretty surprising. Some of my learners were going to sit for their IELTS, for their higher studies. So they turned this activity into an IELTS writing task too. The more creative ones wanted to do a poster presentation using pictures from their real world. And there's this third group who wanted to make a vox pop, which are informal interviews. You interview people informally in public places, on roads and in streets. So here my learners interviewed people in public places and in private places. So they came up with a questionnaire about plastic bags, and they interviewed people and recorded those interviews and presented their findings to the class. And then, of course, there's this group who didn't want to do anything, but they were assigned roles to support group 2 and group 3. So these are some vox pop photos. My learners also got to interview some of the teachers and other staff at the British Council. So sometimes when I set up these project activities, I also use snowballing, which is throwing an element of surprise. So learners investigate the topic in pairs. The pairs then join another pair to form a group and share their findings. So it gets more collaborative. So 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and 8 becomes 16, and then the whole class comes together. Also, when I set up these activities, the project activities especially, I love my learners to think up their own reward. For example, they could decide if they're going to have a pizza party or maybe a movie day in class if everybody hands in their project on time. So that could be motivating too, giving learners rewards. All right, so we've reviewed some criteria for making homework engaging. We've evaluated some typical homework activities. Let's explore some fun homework activities now. Now, what do you do in your free time? Could you comment in the chat box, please? Read, okay. Binge watch, all right, I do that too, Zeus. Attend webinars, all right, that's very nice of you. Write poetry, nice, interesting, creative. Watch films, singing, hiking, wow, lovely. Well, this is the exact very same question that I ask my learners, any new learner group that I meet, and the responses are not very different from yours. So what I try to do is I try to connect my learners' likes and dislikes to the kind of learning or homework activities I set up for them. So from my experience, I'm able to categorize homework activities, fun homework activities into these 4 categories: crafts and arts, outdoor and physical activities, games and other activities, and digital and online activities. I'm sure you all set up a lot of interesting crafts and arts activities. Could you tell us the kind of crafts and arts activities you set up for your learners? Here are examples of some of them that my learners have done. That's an activity they did about sustainable goals. Here's one about habitat. I think that's the Arctic. One of my learners made Chichen Itza. It's a model of the Chichen Itza. And then my learners also make some board games to review the syllabus. Okay, there are some DNA modeling that's nice, playing board games, Christmas postcards. So I'm sure you all have wonderful ideas for setting up crafts and arts. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here. Let's look at outdoor and physical activities. What kind of outdoor and physical activities do you get your learners to do as part of homework? Treasure hunt, gardening, that's very nice. Yes, that's very creative and reflective too, doing gardening. Outdoor sports, yes. Photo treasure hunt, draw, describe a scene. Field trips, I like the idea of going on a field trip. Nature walk, take photos, very nice. So of course, well, I don't do anything different. So I get my learners to go to a library or a book fair if there's one in town, and if I'm aware of that, they could visit a museum or go to a zoo. But it's also important to remember that setting up and doing these activities requires some time and effort and perhaps some money too on part of our learners. So I'd like to do something that is easy to set up, and that is going for a walk. So we've all been sitting for about 30 minutes now. I think it's time to go for a walk. And I mean, literally, I'd like you all to participate in this activity. If you're at home or if you're sitting down, can you please look around you for authentic examples of language in your real world? If you're at home, I'd like you to look in your living room, your wardrobe, the lift, etc. If you're at work, perhaps the meeting room, the lift, the office toilet, or other places. If you're on the road, could you stop and look at the public signs or show shop name boards, etc., and take some pictures if you can. Please remember to come back. Here is an example. So this is an example of the emergency evacuation plan, and that was on my apartment door. So I'm going to give you all a minute to go away, look for some authentic examples of English in your real world, take some pictures, and come back. You've got a minute from now. Please remember to come back. I don't want to lose you. Okay, if you can hear me, I'm hoping that you're looking around for some examples of language in your real world. Okay, that's nice. Henda's taken a screenshot of the chat box. Sagir has perhaps some pictures of the construction site. Glyceria says that she's done this as well. Okay, the quotes on my calendar, that's very nice. I'm glad people are exploring their real world. The coffee mug, that's interesting. I wish I could see your pictures, I wish. Okay, that's very nice. Messages on birthday cards, interesting, lovely. So here are some examples from my real world, the emergency evacuation plan. This is one of my t-shirts that shows an example of used to. I took the third one at one of the parks here in Dubai, and this is the rules board. The fourth one is the rules board from the British Council Courses for Teachers Facebook group. So what do we call these? What do we call these examples? Anybody there? What do we call these examples? Yes, it could be realia, but realia is a little bit different. Visuals, okay. Signals. All right, well, so these are called as linguistic landscape. That is the language in the world around us and the landscape around us. These are called as linguistic landscape, and we find examples of these in advertisements and commercials in the world around us, names of buildings, streets, and shops. It could be instructions or warning signs, and you could also find them in the form of graffiti or some examples in cyberspace. So how do I use this for setting up? How do I use these examples for homework? So I call it what do you see or grammar police. So I ask my learners to look for target language in their real world, and I also tell them where to look. So they take pictures, bring them to class, or share them on Padlet or Instagram, and they compare and find commonalities or differences. And for more extended practice, I get them to make a linguistic landscape in pairs or groups. So perhaps if they've got examples of imperatives, so why not get them to make a rules board? Or if they've got pictures of some name shops, then why not get them to make a name board for the class? Also remember, it doesn't have to be the correct example. Sometimes you could also ask learners to bring examples of some inaccurate language or some bloopers, as you can see on my screen here. I shot this at one of the restaurants in Dubai the other day. And you could also ask them to get examples in their home language. I think it's very important to value our learners' home languages, because language is an important part of our identity. And to welcome diversity in the classroom and to value diversity, it's important to value our learners' home language too. So they could get examples in their home language, and you could compare them with the target language in English and see how different or similar they are. Well, the other common examples are sending your learners away to shop and dine to a restaurant, or maybe to a marketplace or to a mall, where they can practice some language for shopping. Now, let's move on to the digital and online activities. I'm sure all of you gamify homework by setting up activities on quizzes, WordWall, Quizlet, or Anki. Now, the other thing that has become an important part of our reality is virtual reality. Now, earlier on, we talked about sending our learners away to zoos or museums, and sometimes it may not be possible. So why not get them to do it virtually? So if you go to this website, goodhousekeeping.com, you'll find the link to this website in the webinar handout. So if you go to this website, you'll find links to loads of museums, art galleries, and zoos in the world around us. And you can get your learners to look at the live feed. For example, I've got a live feed here. This is a live feed from the Georgia Aquarium. And if you are lucky, we'll get to see some penguins now. I hope you're able to do that. Okay, there they are. Well, so this is the live feed from the Georgia Aquarium, and we can see the penguins there doing their own daily activities, engaged in their daily chores. So sometimes, especially for my primary learners, I send some links to them home with a note where they can explore and look at these live feeds and perhaps write a short paragraph to describe the animal and its behavior, or they could draw what they see, but they have to be ready to talk about it in class. So this helps learners to get transported to a zoo or a museum or an art gallery simply at the click of a button. And there's also these reading and listening activities that I get my learners to do. Now, as you know, there are lots of resources in the world around us for getting our learners to practice reading and listening. Quite often, I get them to choose their book or their song or their film or their favorite video, sometimes in the target language and sometimes in their home language. And they come to class and they talk about it and they answer some questions like these. Why did you choose this? What was it about? How many stars would you give and why? So I usually get my learners to choose what they would like to read or listen to, and they discuss that in the classroom, sometimes in English and sometimes in their home language. Ankita says she uses Google Art and Learning for Games and 3D pottery. That's very nice, Ankita. Yes, your learners could go on a virtual tour. Absolutely. All right, so when we talk about digital activities, the discussion wouldn't be complete without talking about TikTok and Netflix. Well, sometimes I set up homework before the lesson. So this is an activity that I set up for my teenage learners recently. The lesson was about wonders of the world. And I asked them to search for a TikTok or a YouTube video about one of the wonders they would like to visit and answer those questions. And when they came back for the lesson, they discuss their ideas. So I often get my learners to go to Netflix or TikTok and explore videos or films or documentaries connected to the lesson topic, and they talk about it in the classroom. Now, we've been talking about TikTok and Netflix. What about Instagram? Now, a few years ago, when I was teaching some teenage learners, one of my learners asked me if you could take a picture and upload it to Instagram for the absentees. And that's when I discovered that I could use Instagram, not just for entertainment, but also for helping my learners learn. So we're going to look at a few activities that I set up for my learners on Instagram through a game called Fastest Finger First. I'm going to show you some pictures, and I would like you to write a caption or describe the picture using the target language. The first creative response gets a point. So I hope you're ready. Are you ready? Okay, so people are ready. So here we go. Instafood, caption me. You got to use adjectives to describe food and some quantifiers. Yes, Kaushik, that's right. So I visited one of the restaurants here and I took a picture of the Bahubali thali there. Okay, a delicious meal, scrumptious, palatable, colorful, mouth-watering. Okay, but where are the quantifiers? You have to use adjectives to describe food here and also some quantifiers. Oh, a lot of yummy food. That's nice. Moody foodie, nice. The big fat meal. I like that, Zeus. Spicy platter. That's nice. Nutritious, mouth-watering. All right, that's good. Here we go. Second one, Insta thoughts. The cat is asking you, what am I thinking? And you got to use I wish, if only, if I had. That's a little bit tricky. So what is the cat thinking? You got to use I wish. Okay, I wish I could be the master. That's nice. I wish I had your life. I wish I could eat more of that. Oops, that's disappearing pretty quickly. I wish I could speak. Oh, I wish I could get the fish. That's lovely. That's very nice. That's very interesting. I wish I could catch this goldfish. That's interesting. All right, so and obviously, you could also have Insta stories. What do you think your learners can do with this picture? So this was a picture that was taken by the Italian photographer Dumas about 120 years ago. What do you think your learners could do with a picture like this on Instagram? Yes, it's about helping each other. Write a story. That I like that, Sagar. Help others. Yes, the theme is needing each other, empathy, sharing ideas. That's nice. So let me show you what I usually do. So as you can see here, I've introduced the picture to my learners. I've said, meet Muhammad and Samir, the two friends who completed each other's lives. Do you know their story? What do you think was their story? So my learners respond to the picture, they comment on each other's ideas, and then I send them a link to the story. So this was a real story. This became very popular in the news a couple of months ago. These were two people, Muhammad and Samir, in Syria. Muhammad unfortunately could not see, he was blind, and Samir, as you can see, could not walk. So Muhammad needed Samir to give him directions and to do the daily chores or the activities, and Samir needed Muhammad to move around. So they completed each other's lives. So I usually use authentic pictures for my learners where they can respond to each other's ideas, but they also learn, there's a theme for them to explore, but they also learn about cultural awareness or tolerance, and they get to respond to each other's ideas. So basically, my learners and I take turns to post a picture on the lesson topic on Instagram. So it's not just me doing all the work, it's also my learners. So they get to post pictures and reels too on the lesson topic on Instagram. They write a caption or describe it using the target language, and they vote for the best caption or the description, or the one with most likes wins. Well, something that I forgot to tell you earlier on about TikTok, sometimes I also get my learners to make a TikTok video in pairs or groups for homework where they get to summarize the lesson topic or maybe have a conversation practicing the target language. So we looked at some fun, creative activities now. Now let's go back to my mini research. So after I changed my approach to setting up homework activities, I asked my learners the same question, do you like your homework? And the response was more positive and encouraging. About 52% of my learners were happier with the kind of homework activities I started setting up for them. And these were their responses during the focus group discussion. To sum up, the engagement checklist has been very helpful for me and has come in handy for setting up more meaningful and engaging homework and other classroom learning activities for my learners. So what have we achieved today? We've reviewed the criteria for making homework more engaging, evaluated some typical homework activities and saw how we could make them more meaningful, and explored some fun homework activities. I think it's time for questions. While we try to answer some questions, can you reflect on your learning from today's session? So what has been your key takeaway from this session? And what would you like to change about setting up homework for your learners? You could comment in the chat box or in your little notebook out there if there's one with you. Thank you, Zuz. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Fiona. So time for questions. Let's look at your questions now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Huma. That was amazing. You can maybe have a sip of water or have a rest for a second now. That was amazing.
Thank you, Sally.
Dynamic presentation. And I like the way that you've given everyone a little bit of homework to do there, actually. So there was such a lot there, a lot of practical ideas, and great how you've gone. For me, it was great how you've gone from looking at gap fills in course books to all the way to Padlet and then on to TikTok and Instagram. So fantastic.
Thank you, Sally.
Lots and lots of interaction in the chat. Okay, and we've got some questions in the Q&A. So yeah, I think you can see these questions as well.
Yes, I can. Yes, I'm looking at them right now, Sally.
You can choose the ones you'd like to answer, or I can pick out some to ask for you. I mean, I'm going to pick on this one from Rania because there's also another question about level as well. So that's Rania's asking, how could I make homework more fun and engaging for my A1 students? And there's another question about beginners as well. Do you have any sort of immediate advice for teaching beginners at very low levels?
Thank you, Sally, for the question. And Rania, thank you very much. That's a very good question. And Rania, I teach a lot of beginners and elementary learners, and you're right, it can be very tough setting up more engaging activities for elementary learners. Some of the things that I do is like the ones that I showed you in the beginning, adapting the course book activity, perhaps getting them to change the names to themselves, their family members, or other nouns that they can relate to. And quite often I get them to take pictures of the language in their real world, and sometimes I get them to bring realia. For example, imagine you've taught them a lesson about countable or uncountable nouns. So I tell them, okay, so can you look for examples of nouns at home in your refrigerator? Can you list them down in your notebook, and can you categorize them as countable or uncountable? So there are possibilities where you can make homework engaging for your A1 students too, by adapting your coursebook activities and by getting them to look at their real world by using some realia and perhaps some linguistic landscape.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Huma. We've got a couple of questions about low resource areas and low income. So maybe you could cover that rather than using maybe tech like TikTok or Instagram. Any suggestions for low resource situations?
Absolutely. That's a very good question, Sally, one that I was expecting actually. Yes, I mean, if you are working in a low resource context, well, what you could do is you can get your learners, learners don't have to make a TikTok video. If they don't have access to Instagram, you don't have to set up those activities, obviously, if you can't. But I would suggest thinking about adapting your coursebook activity, getting your learners to use what they can find in their environment, perhaps the newspapers. So why don't you give a news headline to your learner and they find out what that article was about, which means they can lay their hands on the local newspaper and perhaps use magazines and other journals that they could use from their environment. And again, going back to the linguistic landscape, why not get them to not take pictures. If they cannot take pictures, if they don't have mobile phones or other resources, perhaps get your learners to look around their environment and draw what they've seen so they can come back to the class, bring their pictures and compare what they found in their environment. And perhaps again, they could bring realia. Well, you could get learners to bring something that represents their culture and talk about it in the classroom if there was a lesson about culture and expressing their opinions. So you could still exploit your learners' real world by using realia, linguistic landscape. You could get them to draw what they've seen instead of taking pictures if you're working in a low resource context. And of course, you also got the print media in the form of newspapers, journals, and other magazines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. Lots of really practical ideas there. Thank you. I think we can really use those print materials for a lot of different things, can't we? In that kind
Absolutely.
of situation. Okay, so moving from low resource to online. I've lost my question now. Okay. Where has it gone? Okay, from Mohammed, what kind of funny activities or fun activities can we give to online students?
Okay, good question there, Mohammed. I think when you, for example, when I set up activities on Instagram, sometimes I choose some funny pictures that my learners have to respond to, or caption, or maybe some funny reels that they could talk about. And sometimes when I get my learners to set up TikTok activities on TikTok, I found my teenage learners, they've come up with some funny TikTok videos, engaging in conversations using the target language. So Mohammed, again, you could use resources that are funny, pictures or reels that are funny that your learners can respond to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we've had a couple of questions about timing. So Abdallah's asking, are these homeworks subsequent after each lesson or not? So I guess asking about, does the homework follow the lesson, and how much time should students spend on homework? That's a great question, I think, about how much time students, because you talked about how much time you spend planning the homework as a teacher, but how long
Yes.
do you expect the students to spend on their homework?
Okay, that's a very good question again. Now, answering the first question, now, are these activities post-lesson? Well, when I talked about TikTok, the TikTok example homework activity, well, that was set before the lesson. So all homework activities don't have to follow the lesson. You can also set pre-lesson activities. So imagine you're going to teach a lesson about, like the one that I talked about, the wonders of the world, or places to visit in London. Then why not get your learners to look up a video about places in London that they would like to visit before the lesson, and they could talk about it in the lesson before you actually go to the target language or the lesson content. So it doesn't always have to follow the lesson, Mohammed. You could also set homework activities that precede the lesson, before the lesson. Now, in terms of how much time learners should spend on their homework, I think you know your learners and their situation best. I think it depends on the time that learners have on their hand on spending for doing different homework activities. So if it's a project activity, then of course your learners are going to need a lot of time working on their projects, and then it means that you're going to give them more time, perhaps a term or maybe a fortnight, to work on their projects, or maybe a couple of terms, as you can deem it fit. But if you have these quick activities on Instagram where you want them to write a caption for something, or respond to a reel or a video, then that's not going to take a lot of time. And also, because it is engaging, learners are eventually going to do them. So I think as a teacher, it is up to us to understand the framework within which our learners work, and the kind of obligations or responsibilities they have in their real world, and set homework accordingly. But you're right, Mohammed, it is important that the homework is achievable and it is smart, which means it is time bound and it is achievable for our learners.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you, Huma. Here's a question from Sagir. We talked a little bit about this before, but Sagir says, I'm from Bangladesh and a teacher of a government primary school in a village. I don't have enough resources to do these kinds of activities. Any suggestions for me? So Sagir is teaching primary in a low resource situation. Have you got anything to add that to your ideas for older? I think they were more for older learners, weren't they? Anything for primary, perhaps?
Yes, that's a good question, Sagar. And I have taught primary students in a low resource context too in India. Now, again, what I have done for my primary learners in the past is get them to bring things from home, for example. So when I teach my primary learners, oh, why don't you get your favorite toy? And they could use the toy and use the toy's voice to talk about their feelings on a particular day if the lesson is about feeling. So again, exploiting the environment in which your primary learners live and using their real world environment I think will be useful for you to set up more engaging activities. So getting them to bring toys from home or things that represent their culture or their life or something that they could identify themselves with. So using those resources, I think will be useful for your learners. And again, you can use print media even with your primary learners. So give them those magazines. They can come up with a collage of different things connected to the lesson, perhaps different countable nouns that you've taught them. So they could look at those magazines and cut out those pictures and make a collage together in the classroom. So it is possible to use resources from their world for setting up engaging activities.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I want to ask you a question actually that hasn't come up here, but it's something that something that I was wondering about homework, because it's something that I've had to deal with, and it's when you're teaching younger learners, what about parents? How do you have any tips on how to get parents on your side?
Okay, that's a very good question, Sally.
If I'm
a
allowed
difficult
to ask
one
my
too.
question.
A difficult one too, yes. Well, so
Is
that's
it?
true.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I think it's very important for teachers to involve learners, to involve parents in the learning journey, because they are one of the important stakeholders, as we all know. So I think one of the ways I involve learners is, especially when I use multilingual approaches to teaching in my classroom, which I do. I get parents to contribute. For instance, if I send homework where learners have to look at words, or perhaps they have to make a motivational word board and they have to come up with words connected to trying and giving up, then I also get my send a note to parents saying that, can you contribute to this homework? So think of your home languages, for example. So can you come up with words that are connected to this activity? So the parents contribute to. Sometimes when I set these homework activities using virtual reality, then I send these links to parents' home and I send them a note saying, can you watch these feeds, these live feeds with your kid, and with your children, and can you have a conversation with them? And I also send some questions that they could ask their children and have a conversation with them about the live feed. For example, you watch this feed about penguins, so they ask their children, oh, what did you notice? What do you like about this feed? Would you like to visit this aquarium? So I also send some follow-up questions that they could use to have conversations with their children in the target language and also in their home language.
Okay, brilliant, fantastic. Thanks, Huma. That's really good. I'm conscious of time, so I think we've got more questions, but I don't think we're going to have time for questions because, as you know, we've got 2 more webinars after this one. But thank you very much for that. I love the penguins, by the way.
Me too.
So thank you very, very much for your presentation. People have been asking about the certificate, the handouts, the recording, and I think all the information is in the chat if you're on the webinar, and if you're joining us on social media, you'll find links there too. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who's joined us. A massive thank you to you, Huma, of course, and also thank you to our social media audience, and to Marcus and Karen who are moderating there, and to Paul, Melissa and Philippa who are here.
Sally, I would like to thank everybody for coming here today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day learning and sharing.